While my family celebrated stealing everything I built, I stayed silent. No interviews, no public fights, just quiet, calculated focus. They thought they'd erased me. But what they didn't know was that every night while they slept comfortably on my stolen money, I was assembling a team. Hardened veterans, cyber experts, legal tacticians. Together, we were shadow response. We didn't scream. We gathered proof. We didn't beg for justice. We built the case that would destroy them from the inside. This isn't just another family drama. This is one of those revenge stories where betrayal doesn't end in tears. It ends in handcuffs. My name is Quinn Maddox, and for most of my life I believed in duty above everything else. I believed in sacrifice, in structure, in the silent discipline of waking up at 4 a.m. while the rest of the world slept peacefully. 27 years. That's how long I wore this uniform, first crisp and oversized on a rookie recruit, then decorated with medals that meant nothing to the people who should have been proudest of me. When I landed back home after my last deployment, I thought I'd finally get to exhale. I had stood tall through countless cyber defense operations, some too classified to even mention in casual conversation. I had endured sandstorms in undisclosed locations, nights without sleep, days without comfort. I thought foolishly that home would be different, that after years spent protecting a country full of strangers, I'd return to the arms of family. Instead, I walked into an ambush I never saw coming. The first sign was my bank account. The day after I returned, I drove to the local grocery store, pushed my cart down the aisles, picked up some basics, eggs, bread, milk, things that didn't require any mental energy to decide on. But when I tapped my card at checkout, it blinked red. Declined. I smiled politely at the cashier, assumed it was a glitch, and used a secondary card. That too was declined. I stood there, the heat crawling up the back of my neck until I paid with the emergency cash I always kept in my back pocket, a habit learned from war zones where power outages and hostile takeovers happened without warning. Later that evening, standing in my silent apartment, the air thick with the scent of fresh paint and unopened boxes, I logged into my online banking. My savings account. Gone. Frozen. I blinked, refreshed the page, checked my other accounts. Same message, account activity restricted pending legal review. My chest tightened. I scrolled through my emails searching for any notification, any sign of what was happening. That's when I saw it. Subject line, in bold letters. Notice of civil proceedings. The sender, Lockhart & Bell, a law firm I didn't recognize. I clicked on it, my fingers steady, my training kicking in even though my heart was hammering. Inside, I read and reread the words, my pulse slowing, as the meaning carved itself into my bones. Plaintiffs, Walter Maddox, Daisy Maddox, Connor Maddox, and Heather Maddox. I felt my stomach twist. My parents and my younger brother Connor, the people whose faces I had carried with me through every deployment, the voices I had longed to hear during nights in foreign deserts. The same people were suing me. Their claims were laid out methodically like a strategic battle plan. Mental instability due to prolonged exposure to combat stress, psychological impairment, inability to make rational financial decisions, endangerment of family assets, loss of mental fitness. They were petitioning the court to take control of my entire estate, claiming I was a liability to myself. They were demanding ownership of the house I bought with years of combat pay, the savings I tucked away after every mission and every asset I had accumulated while serving this country. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things like I'd seen other soldiers do when grief gripped their chests. I sat still, my back straight, my breathing even, because that's what the Army had drilled into me for nearly 3 decades. I absorbed the betrayal, each word sharper than any shrapnel wound, and I remained silent. I scrolled through the rest of the email, reading the attached documents. There were statements from my parents' affidavits filled with thinly veiled disgust. My father Walter describing me as emotionally volatile and disconnected from reality. My mother Daisy painting me as cold, obsessive, incapable of sustaining normal relationships. Connor's testimony stung the most, calling me dangerous, claiming I had cut off contact with family, neglected them, and retreated into conspiracy thinking after every mission. The irony burned in my throat. I had been thousands of miles away, operating in silence to protect these very people, and they had been rewriting my story in my absence. I thought about picking up the phone, calling them, demanding answers. For a moment I hovered over my father's number, then my mother's. My fingers twitched, but I didn't press dial. Because something in my gut told me this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't confusion or misguided concern. This was orchestrated, planned, precise. Just like the cyber warfare attacks I'd been trained to dismantle, I stood up and walked to the small box I'd shoved under the kitchen counter. My deployment files, my service records, my retirement documentation. Everything was in there. I pulled it out, laid it on the table. Piece by piece, I spread out the evidence of my life, of who I was, of what I had endured and earned. I whispered to myself, not this time. I wasn't going to fight them with shouting matches or angry calls. I wasn't going to show up at their doorstep demanding explanations. I was a soldier. I knew how to wait. I knew how to investigate. I knew how to win wars that never made it to the front page. So I opened my laptop again, clicked on a fresh notepad, and began typing, Objective Discover, Financial Irregularities linked to Walter Daisy and Connor Maddox. I would find out everything they'd done while I was away. Every loan, every shady transaction, every manipulation of my name and service. Because if they wanted to call me unstable, they would soon learn what it felt like to be on the other side of precision. My name is Quinn Maddox, and I've survived battlefields across the world. This time the war was at home, and I was just getting started. I pulled into the driveway of the house I thought I knew by heart, and for a brief, ridiculous second I imagined someone would open the door and greet me, that the porch light would flicker on, and my mom would be standing there, maybe with a half-hearted scold about not calling ahead, but still happy to see me. That fantasy lasted all of 5 seconds before reality settled over me like a damp blanket. The porch was dark. The house looked exactly the same, but somehow foreign. The flowers Mom once insisted on planting every spring were gone, replaced with cracked concrete and a crooked mailbox. The curtains were drawn tight. The welcome mat was faded. The word welcome itself barely visible, like the idea had worn thin with time. I got out of the car, my boots making soft crunches on the gravel I helped lay down years ago. Memories flashed through my mind. Summer afternoons repainting that porch railing, holiday mornings standing on that very doorstep pretending everything was fine. I knocked. The knock sounded hollow, like the door no longer belonged to me. It was Connor who answered. His face was a mix of smug satisfaction and carefully feigned surprise. He didn't even try to hide it. The way his mouth curled up on one side, the way his posture straightened like he'd been waiting for this moment. Oh, Quinn, didn't think you'd show up so soon. I didn't respond. I took in the house behind him. The walls that once echoed with Sunday breakfasts and backyard barbecues now felt sterile, cold, like I'd walked into someone else's story. He stepped aside with a casual wave. Come in, I guess. The kitchen smelled different. Not the faint aroma of my mom's favorite vanilla candles or the burnt toast smell Dad never managed to avoid. Just a heavy, manufactured lemon cleaner scent that felt like it was trying too hard to scrub away the past. I walked past the dining table, my boots loud against the worn floorboards, into the living room where Daisy, my mother, sat stiffly on the couch scrolling her phone. She looked up, eyes pausing on me for a second too long, before offering a tight smile like I was an inconvenient neighbor who had stopped by uninvited. Quinn, she said, tone clipped. You didn't say you were coming. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. Didn't think I needed to. She pressed her lips together, eyes dropping back to her phone. I turned toward the hallway where I'd grown up. Birthday parties, scraped knees nights, sitting up studying by the dim light of a secondhand lamp. All of it felt distant, like a story someone else had told me. Where's Dad? My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be. Out back, Connor said, slouching into the recliner like he owned the place. His tone had that victorious ring to it, the kind that said he'd been waiting for me to see whatever they'd built while I was gone. I walked to the sliding glass door, my boots scuffing across the tiles, and stepped outside. The backyard hadn't changed much. The same rickety fence, the same overgrown patch where Dad used to half-heartedly attempt a vegetable garden. Walter Maddox stood near the old shed, cigarette dangling from his mouth, staring out into the woods like I wasn't there. I approached every step, making my pulse tighten. "Hey, Dad," I said. He didn't turn around, just exhaled smoke curling up into the gray afternoon sky. "You shouldn't have come." That was it. No hug, no welcome, not even a "how have you been?" I forced myself to stay calm. I got the lawsuit. A slow nod, still not facing me. "It's for the best." My jaw clenched. "Is that what you tell yourself? That stealing from your own daughter is for the best?" He flinched just barely before stubbing out the cigarette and walking past me without a word, disappearing back inside. I stood there, heart thumping against my ribs, the wind tugging at my sleeves, wondering how we'd gotten here. Wondering how I'd served half the world, survived war zones, only to feel most unwanted standing in my own backyard. I went back inside, every step heavier than the last. I didn't come here for pleasantries. I came for the truth. Connor was flipping channels on the TV like this was just any other day. I leaned against the counter, my arms crossed. "Let's cut to it," I said. "The house, the accounts, the assets. What did you do?" Connor didn't even pretend to be innocent. He grabbed a folder from the side table and tossed it toward me. "It's legal," he said with that sickly grin of his. "Mom and Dad signed it all over. Brighton Trust Holdings now owns the house. Property transfer, asset consolidation. Everything's handled. Nothing shady about it." I flipped through the documents, my fingers trailing over forged signatures, fake company names, corporate stamps. Brighton Trust Holdings. A shell company. Clean, professional on paper, but I'd been in intelligence long enough to recognize a front when I saw one. My throat was dry. This house was paid off with my combat pay. $160,000. Every brick, every beam. I paid for it while you were blowing through your beer money in college. Connor shrugged. "You didn't need it. You were overseas, barely home. You don't have kids. You don't have a future here." Daisy didn't even look up from her phone. My stomach churned. "And the accounts consolidated," Connor said, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Mom and Dad thought it was best. You've always been unpredictable." I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or both. Instead, I stood still, the fury building in my chest like a storm waiting to break. They'd made decisions about my life while I was fighting for theirs. They'd rewritten the ownership of this house, the fruits of my sacrifices, and pretended it was reasonable. I looked around the room that once held holiday memories, family game nights, morning pancakes. It felt smaller, now tainted. "You're trespassing technically," Connor said with a smirk. "Don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I won't stay long." He relaxed back into his chair like he'd won something. I straightened up, every inch of me screaming discipline, every muscle coiled with restrained rage. They thought they'd outplayed me. They thought stripping me of everything I owned would be simple because I wasn't here to stop them. They forgot I was a soldier. I didn't need weapons to win. I needed patience, strategy, precision. And I had all three. So I walked out of the house that used to be my home, out of the life they'd tried to erase me from. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break, because this wasn't over, not even close. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the silence that followed. When I walked out of that house, out of the life they tried to carve me out of, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I did what I'd been trained to do: observe, adapt, and respond with purpose. The mission was clear now: track every dollar, every signature, every lie. They wanted to paint me as broken, as unstable. I'd show them what precision looked like. The next morning, I sat in the small apartment I was now calling home laptop open, a stack of personal files spread across the table. Decades of my life boiled down to discharge papers, military records, and financial statements. Somewhere in these pages lay the thread they had pulled to unravel everything I'd built. I just had to find it. I started with the house, Brighton Holdings. The name alone was enough to make my stomach turn. A company that didn't exist 5 years ago now held the deed to the home I'd paid off. I cross-referenced public records, state registries, corporate databases. Brighton Holdings had no employees, no office, just a P.O. box address listed in a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of town. The registered agent, Quinn Maddox. I expected that. I was prepared for that. What I didn't expect was the level of arrogance. Connor hadn't even tried to hide it. The filings were sloppy, the transfers blatant. My name wiped clean from the title documents through power of attorney I never signed. The signatures forgeries. Even the notary stamp didn't match any registered legal entity in the state. Next, I traced the financial accounts. It started with a hollowed-out bank account that used to be my emergency deployment fund. One by one, I lined up wire transfers labeled family support, medical expense coverage, asset realignment. I didn't remember authorizing any of them. But the digital trails were there. Payments rerouted to Brighton Holdings invoices for family care services billed by a company called Haven Wellness Center. Haven Wellness. That was new. I dug deeper. My heart slowed as I opened the registration file. Heather Maddox, Connor's wife, listed as director of Haven Wellness. Their slogan plastered in cheap Arial font across their bare-bones website. Helping veterans heal from the inside out. I clicked through the site, each page emptier than the last. Stock photos of smiling counselors' testimonials I recognized as plagiarized from government brochures. Fake. All of it. I opened the business license application, filed 18 months ago shortly after I'd been deployed to a classified overseas assignment. Just in time to start siphoning money from veterans' support programs. From my benefits. A cold knot settled in my chest. I downloaded every public record I could find, cross-referenced every filing, every transaction. No, Brighton Holdings and Haven Wellness weren't just stealing from me. They were exploiting the very programs I'd fought to protect. I wasn't just their victim. I was their asset, their cash cow, while I bled for a country they took for granted. The hours turned into days, the lines between morning and night blurred. I barely ate, I barely slept. I survived on cold coffee and decades of discipline. Every morning I woke to news articles questioning my sanity, online whispers about the disgraced veteran being sued by her own family. Neighbors who once waved in the driveway now looked away in the grocery store. Old colleagues fell silent, reluctant to get involved in family drama. The world moved on without me. But I kept digging. I unearthed fraudulent medical claims filed in my name applications for mental health stipends, rerouted to Brighton Holdings. They'd forged psychological evaluations, faked hospital admissions, painted me as a damaged shell of a person. The narrative they built wasn't just designed to strip me of money, it was designed to erase me altogether. In the quiet of my apartment, the ghosts of my past crept in. Faces of men and women I served beside those I lost to battlefields and bureaucratic failures. Nights where I jolted awake from dreams that weren't dreams at all. Memories stitched together with fear and grief. The sharp crack of gunfire replaced by the cold click of legal betrayal. The suffocating weight of body armor swapped for suffocating headlines branding me unstable. I didn't allow myself to break. Not when the world wanted me to. Not when my own blood wanted me to vanish. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the lines the years had carved into my face. I didn't see brokenness. I didn't see instability. I saw someone they underestimated. Someone they were foolish enough to declare war on. Connor was sloppy, but I wasn't. Heather was greedy, but I wasn't careless. My parents were complicit, but I was patient. The laptop blinked with a new notification. Another payment scheduled from my military retirement account to Brighton Holdings. I smiled. Cold. Focused. I canceled the transfer. Then I picked up my phone and called an old contact, someone who owed me a favor from the years we spent neutralizing foreign cyber threats before they reached American shores. His voice was gruff but respectful when he answered. "Quinn, thought you retired. Turns out I'm just starting a new mission," I said. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. People like us understood when the fight came home. I sent him everything. Documents, bank records, shell company registrations, fraudulent claims, false medical paperwork. Every digital footprint Connor and Heather thought they could bury. And then I sat back, letting the wheels of a much bigger machine start turning. In the solitude of that apartment, surrounded by the fragments of a life they tried to steal, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. They thought I was too broken to fight back. They'd forgotten what I was trained to do. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier, and soldiers don't give up. We regroup, we recalibrate, and we strike when the enemy least expects it. My name is Quinn Maddox, and I was just warming up. Underneath every betrayal, there's always a second layer, the one people try to hide, the one that reveals who they really are. I learned that on deployment, sifting through encrypted chatter from warlords who smiled for cameras while orchestrating black market trades behind the scenes. I thought I was done with that world when I hung up my uniform. But sitting in my apartment, documents sprawled across every surface, I realized I had never left it. The battlefield just changed zip codes. The more I dug, the deeper the rot spread. The payments from my accounts weren't isolated thefts. They were part of a much bigger operation. Brighton Holdings wasn't just funneling my money into offshore accounts. They were laundering cash through a web of shell companies that reached well beyond our small town. At first, I thought it was just Connor and Heather, greedy and sloppy. But every breadcrumb I followed led to names I didn't recognize, transactions routed through known tax havens and payout patterns, flagged in federal fraud databases. I traced a sequence of payments from my disabled veteran benefits to a nonprofit called Silverwell Outreach. From there, the money jumped to a consultancy registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Vanguard Civic Group, then looped back into Brighton Holdings under the guise of property management dividends. It was clean on paper, but I'd spent years in cyber defense cracking encrypted cells and following ghost accounts. This was laundering pure and simple. Dressed up in legal jargon, hidden behind donation receipts and corporate paperwork. Then came the military data. At first, I thought the fraudulent claims were just about draining my finances. But when I pulled up old clearance logs and cross-referenced login attempts during my deployments, I found anomalies. Entries logged under my credentials while I was on blacked-out assignments. Access requests I never made, security verification codes issued to devices I didn't own. My stomach dropped. I reopened Haven Wellness Center's grant applications. Heather had applied for multiple government-funded contracts under the pretense of veteran rehabilitation programs. In those proposals were patient lists that included names I recognized. Soldiers who had never set foot in my town, some who were deceased, some who had never even applied for mental health services. Their records were doctored, their files padded with just enough fabricated detail to pass casual audits. Through those grant applications, they'd gained access to sensitive service histories, deployment logs, and most dangerously, clearance renewal cycles. The financial theft was disgusting, but this was treason. I took a breath and opened the transfer documents related to the house. My house. The paper trail wasn't limited to Connor and Heather's signatures. Every notarized form, every reassignment of ownership, every financial transaction tied to Brighton Holdings was accompanied by the distinct looping cursive of my mother, Daisy Maddox, and the blocky, deliberate print of my father, Walter Maddox. Page after page, they had signed away the assets I worked my life to build, signed off on rerouting my benefits, signed approval letters for fraudulent bank loans taken out in my name. My chest burned, but I stayed focused, flipping through the evidence with mechanical efficiency. My parents weren't just turning a blind eye, they were active participants. They weren't victims conned by Connor's schemes. They were willing partners in gutting my life from the inside out. Every signature felt like a nail driven into the coffin of the family I thought I had. Every transaction detail screamed a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd sold me off piece by piece, wearing the mask of loving parents while cashing in every piece of me they could monetize. My apartment was dim now, the sun long gone, the only light spilling from my laptop and the flickering street lamp outside. I barely noticed. I had gone days without proper sleep, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. This wasn't a family squabble. It wasn't even a financial dispute. This was organized crime. I gathered every thread of evidence into folders documenting timelines, payment trails, and data breaches. I triple encrypted every file and stored copies in off-site secure servers. My training reminded me that uncovering the truth was only the first battle. Staying alive long enough to expose it was the real war. Pulling out a burner phone I'd kept from my last assignment, I dialed a contact I'd never expected to call again. Agent Dakota Harlan, a federal operative I'd worked with years ago. Someone who specialized in tracking cyber-financial threats with military intersections. She picked up on the second ring. Maddox, her tone was brisk efficient. No small talk? She knew what my call meant. "I've got a family problem," I said quietly. "And it's about to escalate. How deep international laundering, identity theft, potential breaches of military data, possibly cleared intelligence files, all under my name. My parents and brother are in the center of it." There was a brief silence, the kind that meant wheels were already turning on her end. "Send everything. I'll get it classified off the grid. You'll hear from me within 24 hours. I sent it. Then I sat back in my chair staring at the faces frozen in family portraits, stacked in boxes I never bothered to unpack. The same faces who sat beside me on Christmas mornings, who pinned my first medal to my chest, who told me they were proud while sharpening knives behind my back. My life had been a series of war zones, but nothing prepared me for this. I'd fought terrorists, warlords, cybercriminals. Now I was fighting the people who gave me my name, my childhood, and apparently my downfall. I wasn't fighting for money anymore. I wasn't fighting for the house. I was fighting for my identity, my service, and the soldiers whose names they'd trampled for a quick buck. I stood up, stretched my arms that ached from hours of sifting through betrayal, and told myself something every soldier learns the hard way. It's never personal. It's about the mission. But deep down I knew this time. It was both. And I would finish it. Not a single person knocked on my door after the story broke. The neighborhood I'd grown up in, the streets I used to jog through on summer evenings, turned cold overnight. Faces I had known since childhood suddenly found new reasons to cross the street when I approached. It didn't take long before the articles started flooding every local feed. Decorated soldier sued by family for mental instability, family battles for protection against unstable veteran, former officer accused of endangering family assets. They didn't care to mention the years I served, the missions I completed, or the security I provided while the rest of them enjoyed backyard barbecues and little league games. They only cared about the scandal, the headline that made them click. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, that maybe the polite distance was just people minding their own business. But it didn't take much to see the change. The whispers were louder, the side glances sharper. The local cafe where the barista used to greet me with a smile started handing me my coffee in silence. The woman who ran the grocery store checkout barely looked up when I said thank you. The neighbor who once asked me to keep an eye on her house during vacations pulled her kids closer as I passed by. It wasn't just strangers. Friends, or at least people I used to call friends, went quiet too. Old colleagues stopped replying to my texts. Veterans I used to serve with reached out not to offer support but to cautiously ask what really happened. There was something in their voices, pity mixed with skepticism, as if they couldn't decide whether to comfort me or distance themselves before the fallout consumed them too. And somehow it wasn't new. It was familiar, painfully so. It was a feeling I'd known long before the tabloids discovered my name. I closed my eyes, and found myself back in that cramped little house on Maple Drive. Back when I was the kid who did her homework at the kitchen table while Connor got to skip chores because he had a long day. Back when Mom's praises always seemed louder for him, and Dad's handshakes always a little firmer when Connor managed the bare minimum. I remembered standing in the backyard on my 15th birthday cake untouched while they celebrated Connor's soccer tryouts, because those don't happen every day. I remembered the way teachers told me I was so independent while they called Connor the bright one. I remembered the Christmas I spent alone on base because Connor had been arrested for drunk driving and Mom said, "Your brother needs us more right now." I remembered the look in Dad's eyes when I enlisted, disappointment veiled under a forced smile, because I wasn't taking the college scholarship that Connor flunked out of. It had always been this way. I had always been the afterthought, the backup plan, the silent soldier who never asked for anything. But I thought serving, sacrificing, protecting would somehow fix it. That medals would replace neglect, that years of service would finally make them see me. How naive. Every memory now seemed like a red flag I'd ignored. Every backhanded comment, every deflection, every time Connor got away with something because he was just figuring life out while I was expected to be the strong one, the responsible one, the invisible backbone holding a broken family together. But this time I wasn't going to carry their weight. This time I wouldn't be the one they leaned on while stabbing me in the back. I stood in my apartment, the headlines flashing on the muted television. And I made myself a promise I would see this through, no matter how many people turned their backs on me. I would pull the thread until every lie unraveled. I would walk into that courtroom, not as the outcast daughter they painted me to be, but as the soldier they could never break. There were moments the isolation clawed at me. The nights were the worst. The silence was deafening, the emptiness pressing down like an extra layer of armor I hadn't asked for. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the soldiers who didn't make it home, the ones who fought beside me with no family waiting on the other side. I thought of them, of what they'd say if they could see me now. I imagined one of my old squad leaders, his voice sharp and familiar. "You don't lay down for cowards, Maddox. You keep moving." I kept moving. Every morning I forced myself out of bed. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs screamed, until the noise in my head dulled to a manageable hum. I cooked meals even if I couldn't finish them. I cleaned my apartment, made my bed, kept my routine, because discipline wasn't just for the battlefield. It was how I survived. I worked through every document, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer until my eyes blurred. I logged everything, cross-referenced accounts, built timelines, detailed evidence folders like my life depended on it. Because it did. And slowly the fog started to lift. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my name or my assets. It was about standing up after a lifetime of being pushed down. It was about refusing to be erased by the people who should have protected me first. It was about showing every person who whispered behind my back that strength doesn't come from public approval. It comes from surviving storms others wouldn't last a day in. So when the phone rang with reporters fishing for a comment, I didn't answer. When so-called friends sent polite texts asking, "Are you okay with the curiosity of vultures circling a carcass?" I didn't respond. I focused on the mission. I focused on justice. The family I grew up in had discarded me. The community I'd served had doubted me, but I had faced worse enemies in worse conditions. I was still standing. I was still fighting. And I would not stop. I had learned long ago that sometimes the loudest victories were won in absolute silence. I wasn't interested in a public fight. I wasn't going to shout into the void for people who had already made up their minds about me. I wasn't going to argue with reporters who'd decided my fate before knowing the facts. But my battle wouldn't be fought in news headlines or public opinion. It would be fought quietly with precision and with the kind of discipline only years of service could sharpen. So I made the first call. It went to Nora Vance, former cyber intelligence specialist, the best digital forensics analyst I had ever known. Nora had walked away from government service after burning out in a high-stakes counter-espionage division. She worked freelance now, choosing her battles carefully, but she always answered when I called. "Quinn." She said, her tone sharp, professional, without hesitation. I saw the news. You need me. I need the best digital paper trail built in complete silence, I replied. Send me everything. We'll make them choke on their own lies. The second call went to Cole Whitaker, former military legal affairs officer turned private defense consultant. Cole wasn't the type to waste words. He was surgical with his approach, lethal in the courtroom, and more importantly, he knew how to navigate military bureaucracy like a wolf through the woods. Just tell me where the bodies are buried, Maddox, he said, calm and confident. I'll draft every motion to make sure they can't breathe. I had 2 more to call. Reed Dalton, former human intelligence specialist, the man who could track people and connections without touching a keyboard. Reed's charm was disarming, but his instincts were razor sharp. He had a way of making people talk without them realizing they were confessing. He owed me a favor from a mission in Syria, and he never forgot debts. The fourth was someone I hesitated to contact, Logan Hart. My former commanding officer, now quietly running logistics for a private defense contractor. Logan was a strategist, the type who could draw a map of power and money before anyone realized they were pieces on a chessboard. I knew he had access to channels I couldn't tap on my own. By the end of the day, I had my team. We weren't operating under any official flag. We weren't sanctioned by any government body. We were shadow response, born from necessity, guided by loyalty, answering only to each other. Our mission was simple. Expose every fraudulent transaction, dismantle the corporate shell games, trace every dime that had been stolen under my name, and gather evidence so irrefutable it would snap the courtroom like a dry twig. We worked in silence. No social media posts, no public accusations, no press interviews. Nora started pulling metadata from the forged documents, unraveling the hidden fingerprints left behind by Connor and Heather's amateur forgery attempts. She cracked into Brighton Holdings' fake accounting software in a matter of hours, mapping out the laundering pathways from shell corporations in Belize, Seychelles, and Panama straight into Connor's personal investment accounts. Reed began shadowing Heather's movements discreetly, gathering proof that her supposed wellness center was a hollow front. He photographed empty counseling offices, tracked shipments to non-existent therapy programs, and gathered video footage of Connor meeting with shady middlemen in places no legitimate business should operate. Cole assembled the legal case like building a fortress, locking in affidavits, expert testimonies, and a strategy designed to collapse every false claim my family filed. He drafted subpoenas before the opposing side could even imagine what was coming. Logan, from his end, funneled us protected intel on contractors linked to Brighton Holdings, some of whom were flagged in previous investigations for money laundering and veteran benefit fraud. He secured discreet audits from financial institutions and tipped off internal compliance officers who would trigger red flags without exposing our hand too early. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. I didn't react to the growing media storm. I didn't attend the preliminary court hearings where they tried to have my assets seized under emergency injunctions. I didn't respond when Heather paraded herself on local morning shows spewing lies about how I hadn't been the same since deployment, and how the family was just trying to help me get back on track. Let them think I was weak. Let them think they had won. Every day the noose tightened. Every day Nora uncovered new falsified transactions. Every day Reed found another thread to pull. Every day Logan sent quiet signals that the enemy's walls were cracking from within. Every day Cole reinforced the legal barricade that would hit them like a tidal wave when the time came. I was patient. I had always been patient. When I served, I'd spent months lying in the shadows waiting for one wrong move to bring down an entire network of threats. This was no different, except this time the threat wore familiar faces. I set up a war board in my living room mapping every connection. Financial, legal, personal. Dots and lines sprawled across the corkboard, the entire scheme laid bare under my fingertips. I followed the money. I followed the lies, and more importantly, I followed the weaknesses. Because there's always a weak point, always a crack, no matter how much polish people try to put on their scams. And every time I pinned another piece of evidence on the board, I felt the bitterness in my chest harden into steel. They didn't just steal my money. They didn't just forge my name, they erased me while I stood guard for them. But this time I wasn't standing guard. I was hunting. And when the time came when the courtroom doors opened, I wouldn't walk in alone. I'd walk in with every receipt, every forged document, every bank transfer, and every piece of proof that the people who called themselves my family were nothing more than criminals hiding behind my service. I'd let the evidence speak. I'd let the silence destroy them. And I wouldn't stop until every piece of my life they tried to steal was dragged into the light. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse, I sat alone at my table, hands folded neatly in front of me, posture straight. I wore my full dress uniform, polished medals resting on my chest boots, shined to mirror perfection. I hadn't worn it since retirement, but today wasn't about comfort. It was about truth. It was about reminding everyone in that room who I was before they tried to rewrite me into a villain. Connor sat across from me, flanked by Heather and their attorney, a slick man in a three-piece suit who already looked far too pleased with himself. Daisy and Walter sat a few rows back, eyes down, deliberately avoiding my gaze. They had chosen their side. The courtroom murmurs died down when Judge Sullivan entered. He was an older man, years of experience carved into the lines on his face, reputation built on fairness, but no tolerance for nonsense. The attorney stood first, clearing his throat with exaggerated confidence. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth as oil. "We present indisputable evidence that Miss Quinn Maddox is regrettably suffering from prolonged mental instability stemming from years of military trauma. Her erratic behavior, isolation from family, and unstable financial decisions all point to a concerning pattern." He gestured broadly toward me without even a glance. "This family has come forward not out of greed but out of responsibility, to protect her from herself, to safeguard the legacy that her honorable service once promised, before it became overshadowed by paranoia and delusion." Connor leaned in dramatically, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not the same person. Your Honor, we tried helping her. She cut us off. She's unpredictable, aggressive, unstable. We feared for our safety. That's why we had to step in." Heather sniffled on cue, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue. "She threatened us," she added, her voice trembling. "We didn't want it to come to this, but we had no choice." Their lawyer pulled out a folder, shuffling through pages. "We have signed affidavits from neighbors, prior colleagues, even extended family expressing concern. Financial records showing reckless spending, medical notes highlighting untreated psychological trauma. It's all here." He turned to the judge, his tone softening as if speaking on behalf of caring relatives. "We ask the court to grant full conservatorship to Connor Maddox and his parents to prevent Miss Maddox from further harming herself and to preserve what remains of her estate for responsible stewardship." Judge Sullivan listened unmoved, his pen tapping gently against his notepad. I remained silent. I had no rebuttal speeches prepared, no dramatics to offer. I didn't rise in outrage or shout across the courtroom. I didn't point fingers. I waited until their attorney smugly announced, "That concludes our initial statement," before slowly standing. I walked calmly to the front, a single manila envelope in my hands. Every step was measured, every muscle under control. I placed the envelope on the judge's desk, sliding it forward with steady fingers. "Your Honor," I said, my voice even and clear with your permission, "I submit this single piece of evidence. I ask that it be reviewed before any further conclusions are drawn." Judge Sullivan raised an eyebrow, adjusted his glasses, and opened the envelope. The room was quiet, every breath seemingly held in suspension. He began reading. Line after line, his expression shifted from detached professionalism to furrowed concern, then to something sharper. His lips pressed into a thin line, his pen stilled. He read to the bottom of the page, flipped it over, then back again, as if making absolutely sure he was seeing correctly. His eyes lifted, locking on me, then shifted toward Connor and Heather. Finally, his attention settled on the bailiff. "Close the doors," Judge Sullivan said, his voice suddenly cold and commanding. "No one leaves this room." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff hesitated, startled, but followed orders, moving swiftly to secure the exits. Connor's cocky grin faltered. Heather's color drained from her face. Their attorney blinked rapidly, suddenly unsure of himself. What's happening?" Connor stammered. The judge's tone cut through the panic. "Remain seated, Mr. Maddox. This court is moving into an immediate evidentiary review based on new substantial findings presented by Miss Maddox." I stood silently, shoulders squared, my face blank. Judge Sullivan continued, his words clipped. "This document details a comprehensive audit of fraudulent financial activity perpetrated by the plaintiffs against Miss Maddox, including identity theft, embezzlement of veteran benefits, illegal transfer of property via forged documentation, and, most concerning, unauthorized access to restricted military data during classified operations." Connor's mouth opened, then closed like a gasping fish. Sullivan's voice grew sharper. "It includes irrefutable digital evidence, notarized confessions from 2 external witnesses, and a financial trail that not only invalidates the claims of this conservatorship request, but implicates the plaintiffs in a felony-level organized fraud scheme." Heather let out a strangled cry, clutching her tissue like it could shield her from the avalanche that was coming. Connor slammed a hand on the table. "This is lies. She forged this." The judge's glare stopped him cold. "The forensic analysis included with this document has been pre-validated by an independent federal review. I have already forwarded this to the proper authorities." Turning to the bailiff, Sullivan ordered summon federal agents to this courtroom immediately. Daisy finally looked up. Her eyes wild and Walter's face turned gray. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I stood silently, the weight I'd carried for months anchored in discipline, watching the first cracks break through their carefully constructed lies. Connor's lawyer frantically flipped through his papers, sweat forming at his temple. "Your Honor, this isn't standard procedure." Judge Sullivan's gaze hardened. "Standard procedure doesn't apply when you step into my courtroom trying to manipulate justice with fabricated evidence while engaging in federal crimes." The room was locked down. The courtroom that was supposed to be the stage for my public humiliation had turned into the battleground where the truth stood taller than any slander. I remained quiet. I let the evidence speak for me. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound of victory approaching. Under the suffocating silence of that courtroom, the door swung open with force. It wasn't a bailiff or a clerk stepping through. It was Special Agent Dakota Harlan dressed in full tactical gear. Her badge displayed prominently, followed by a small team of federal agents in navy jackets with bold yellow lettering. The words Department of Homeland Security and Cybercrimes Division blazed across their backs like a thunderclap that finally shattered the charade my family had built. The shuffle of chairs, startled gasps, and rising tension filled the room. Connor stiffened in his seat, his bravado from earlier completely drained. Heather's lips quivered as she instinctively scooted closer to Connor, her hands clutching at his arm like it would anchor her to reality. Across the room, my mother's breath hitched, and I saw Daisy's hand fly to her chest, her complexion paling. My father, Walter, didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared forward like a man suddenly aware that his kingdom was nothing but ash. Agent Harlan strode directly to Judge Sullivan, handing him a separate sealed file. "Your Honor, we have reviewed and corroborated the submitted evidence. Arrest warrants have been issued for Connor Maddox, Heather Maddox, Daisy Maddox, and Walter Maddox on multiple counts of identity theft fraud against a federal entity, conspiracy to commit cybercrimes, embezzlement, and unauthorized access to classified military data." Connor jolted to his feet, knocking over his chair. "This is insane!" His voice cracked, no trace of confidence remaining. We were protecting her." Harlan's tone was ice. "Mr. Maddox, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it." 2 agents flanked him, arms moving swiftly to cuff his wrists behind his back. The harsh, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the room louder than any scream could. Heather let out a choked sob, shrinking into herself, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. When the agents approached her, she didn't protest. Her fight was gone before it even started. As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, she whimpered, "It was all Connor. I just followed orders." "Save it for your attorney." Agent Harlan replied sharply, motioning her forward. I watched Daisy tremble, her entire body shaking as she turned to Walter, her lips mouthing, "What do we do?" Walter's jaw tightened, muscles flexing as if swallowing a lifetime of denial. But he didn't move. He didn't resist when agents approached him gently but firmly, guiding his hands behind his back. "Walter Maddox, the lead agent, announced you are under arrest for direct involvement in fraudulent financial schemes, targeting veteran assistance programs, knowingly signing falsified documents, and participating in the transfer of stolen federal benefits to unauthorized entities." Walter's head lowered. His broad shoulders sagged under the weight of years of deception finally crashing down. Then came Daisy's turn. "Ma'am, we have you on record authorizing multiple fraudulent financial transactions, providing falsified testimony in court filings, and participating in identity theft schemes targeting your own daughter." Harlan stated, her tone devoid of sympathy. Daisy's knees buckled, and for a second it looked like she might collapse. But the agent steadied her, secured her wrists, and guided her gently forward as she broke into uncontrollable sobs. Her cries filling the courtroom that once felt like my enemy's ground. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply stood in my corner, arms folded, heart steady, pulse calm. This was what justice looked like. Not in fiery revenge, not in explosive confrontation, but in truth, standing tall while lies crumbled under their own weight. Connor's attorney sputtered, trying to gather words, waving papers in the air. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular, my clients." Judge Sullivan cut him off sharply, slamming his gavel. Silence. "This court is in recess pending criminal proceedings. Any further discussion will be handled in federal jurisdiction." Agent Harlan approached me next, her face professional, but her eyes softening slightly. "We'll be processing them now. They won't be walking away from this." I nodded, swallowing down the bitter cocktail of betrayal and relief. "Thank you," I said simply. Harlan tilted her head. "You brought the house down yourself, Maddox. I just made sure it stayed down." As they led my family out of the courtroom one by one, I watched the empire they'd built on my back finally crumble. Connor, once smug and superior, couldn't hide the panic in his wide eyes. Heather, who paraded herself as a loving wife, was reduced to a sniveling mess. Daisy. My mother collapsed into broken sobs, and Walter, always the stoic patriarch, left in cold silence, exposed for the fraud he was. They didn't spare me a single glance on the way out. No apologies, no justifications, just shame and fear. For a brief moment, I felt the burn of old wounds trying to reopen, the sting of every Christmas forgotten, every medal ignored, every sacrifice dismissed. But it didn't swallow me this time. I stood taller, heavier, not with sorrow, but with justice. As the last of them were escorted through the door, the courtroom emptied. I stayed standing there for a while, surrounded by silence, the bitter echo of years lost bouncing around me. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I had faced war zones that tore families apart. I had faced explosions, betrayals, losses that never healed. And through it all, I survived. This was no different. I walked out of that courthouse head held high, knowing that for the first time I had fought for myself. And I had won. Underneath the roar of victory, there was nothing. No surge of triumph, no intoxicating sense of justice served. Just silence, deep, consuming, and oddly empty. When the final gavel fell and my family was marched out of the courtroom, people expected me to smile, to revel in the glory of vindication. But I didn't. All I felt was exhaustion. Decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and bloodlines reduced to criminal records and broken illusions. The name Maddox, which once meant family, now tasted like ash. By the time I walked out of the courthouse, the world was already watching. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones shoved into my face, cameras snapping away. They wanted sound bites, emotions, a viral moment where the disgraced veteran reclaimed her name. I gave them nothing. I pushed through, jaw clenched, ignoring the barrage of questions. How does it feel to win? What would you say to your parents now? Is revenge worth it? I kept walking. That night my phone exploded, calls from news outlets offering exclusive interviews, podcasts, wanting to share my hero's journey, networks proposing book deals and documentaries. They wanted to package my pain to monetize my downfall and resurrection. Every ping of a new notification felt like a slap. I shut the phone off and dropped it into a drawer. I didn't need a headline. I needed peace. The apartment felt like a bunker. Safe, but isolating. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world spin by without me. For the first time in years, there was no mission briefing, no legal meeting, no upcoming court appearance looming like a dark cloud. Just quiet. But it wasn't the comforting quiet I had hoped for. It was hollow, heavy with the weight of everything I had lost along the way. I thought about the nights in the desert, sitting under foreign skies, wondering what home would feel like when I returned. I thought about how I used to picture backyard barbecues, family dinners, nieces and nephews climbing into my lap while I told stories about my deployments. I thought about the delusions I built to keep myself sane through endless deployments. And now, with the lies stripped away, all that remained was truth. And truth was cold. For days, I didn't leave my apartment. I let the media frenzy burn itself out while the world moved on to the next scandal. My name faded from the headlines, the camera crews packed up, and the phone calls stopped. And in the stillness, I finally began to breathe again. Not easily, not joyfully, but steadily. But I couldn't sit in the silence forever. One evening, while scrolling aimlessly through old service photos, I stumbled across a picture. Me with my first deployment squad, sand and sweat caking our uniforms, grins wide despite the exhaustion. I remembered those days vividly, the raw camaraderie, the fierce protectiveness we had for each other. It struck me how many of those men and women didn't have anyone waiting for them back home. How many of them endured silent betrayals, not always by family, but by a system too big to care. That night a thought took root. My war wasn't unique. My betrayal wasn't the only one. There were others out there. Veterans discarded by families, swindled by relatives, abandoned when they returned broken and bruised. People like me standing alone in apartments, drowning in silence after surviving hell. I didn't need fame. I didn't need revenge tours or revenge stories twisted by media narratives. I needed purpose. And so I got to work. I drafted the first outlines of the Sentinel Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing legal aid, financial counseling, and emotional support to veterans betrayed by their own, not just the ones defrauded by families, but those manipulated by spouses, scammed by distant relatives, or left destitute by those who should have stood by them. People who had nowhere to turn once the uniforms came off. With my remaining savings, I hired a team. Not lawyers who wanted to chase headlines, but quiet warriors with hearts that understood the pain of silent battles. I reached out to Nora Cole Reed and Logan asking for referrals. Within weeks, I had a network of cyber analysts tracking fraudulent veteran scams, pro bono attorneys preparing defenses for those falsely accused, and mental health counselors specializing in military trauma. We started small. One veteran in Mississippi who was being sued by a sibling for disability benefits, a single mother in Arizona whose parents tried to seize custody of her kids claiming post-traumatic instability, a retired Marine in Ohio, defrauded out of his pension by a nephew. We fought for them quietly, effectively, and relentlessly. Word spread, not through flashy commercials or TV spots, but through the quiet grapevine of the veteran community. Calls trickled in, then flooded. Veterans who had been silent for too long finally reaching out, voices cracking as they realized they weren't alone. Every case we took healed a small part of me. Every scam we dismantled, every injustice we overturned stitched up a wound I thought would never close. I didn't need cameras to validate my worth. I didn't need public applause. The quiet thank you notes, the relieved phone calls, the grateful families. Those were my medals now. Some days I still felt the ache of what I'd lost. I still dreamed of childhood Christmases, of a family that never really existed the way I imagined. But the bitterness no longer consumed me. I had replaced it with purpose, with action, with service to those who truly understood sacrifice. And when people asked me if I felt like a hero, I smiled quietly to myself. No, I wasn't a hero. I was a soldier who survived. A survivor who learned to fight back not with rage, but with resolve. There was no parade waiting for me, no victory banners. But for the first time, I didn't need any of it. I had something better. I had freedom. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, calm, yet commanding its waves folding into each other with quiet rhythm. I stood barefoot in the cool sand, my toes sinking slightly, the salt air filling my lungs. It had been years since I allowed myself to just stand still, to feel something other than duty or anger, to exist, without calculating my next move. The battles, the betrayals, the courtroom wars, they were behind me now, drifting away with each retreating wave. I let the breeze tangle my hair as I closed my eyes, listening to the water's soft hush, the cries of distant seagulls, the steady heartbeat of the world carrying on. This was peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of freedom. The kind of freedom that didn't come from clearing your name in a court or watching your enemies fall. It came from realizing you no longer needed their approval, that you no longer had to contort yourself into something acceptable to people who had never truly seen you. For most of my life, I'd chased validation. I'd earned medals hoping they'd fill a void my family had carved into me. I'd served my country with everything I had, believing that maybe, just maybe, they'd see me differently, see me as enough. But the truth was painfully simple. Some people will always see you through the lens of their own selfishness, their own limitations. No accolade, no act of loyalty could change hearts that were never built to love you without condition. And that was okay. Because I no longer lived for them. I no longer sought redemption from those who had condemned me behind closed doors while smiling in public. I had stopped trying to rewrite the past, stopped trying to force love where none existed. The only approval I needed was my own, and for the first time in my life, I had it. Behind me, the foundation I built stood tall. Sentinel was thriving. Veterans who had been voiceless now had advocates fighting beside them. I thought of the young woman we'd just helped last month, discharged dishonorably after her family had framed her for theft to access her savings. She now walked free, her record cleared, rebuilding her life. I thought of the elderly Marine in Louisiana who got his home back after his own son forged ownership documents. Story after story, battle after battle, we stood beside them, steady and silent, proving that no one deserved to be erased just because they served quietly. I had found my people, not the ones bound by blood, but by understanding, by mutual respect. People who didn't care how many medals I wore, but cared how fiercely I protected those who had been forgotten. People who didn't want to use my sacrifices, but honored them with their actions. I opened my eyes to the horizon, the golden streak of the setting sun bleeding into the ocean's edge. My life didn't end in that courtroom. It didn't end the day I lost my family. It began in the quiet afterward, in the rebuilding, in the rediscovery of who I was beyond all the labels forced upon me. I stepped forward, letting the water wash over my feet, cold and invigorating like a quiet reset. You don't need to win family approval to reclaim your worth. I whispered it to myself, not as a desperate mantra, but as an undeniable truth. My worth was never measured by anyone else's comfort. It was never tied to their expectations, their manipulation, or their acceptance. It was built in every deployment I survived, every injustice I endured, every broken piece I stitched back together. It was built in my resilience. And I had so much more life to live. I turned my back to the ocean, a soft smile tugging at my lips. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was walking boldly into my future. I didn't need revenge, didn't need their apologies, didn't need a picture-perfect ending. I needed peace, purpose, and people who understood what it meant to rise from the ashes. Back in my car, the folder of new cases waited patiently on the passenger seat, and my phone buzzed quietly with another referral from a struggling veteran. My work wasn't done. It probably never would be. But I welcomed it. I welcomed every opportunity to be the shield I once needed, to be the advocate I never had. The road home no longer led to the house where my family lived. It led to something far more meaningful. To healing, to helping, to hope. I started the engine. My chest light, my head clear. I was free. Free from their expectations. Free from their lies. Free to choose my own family, my own battles, and my own peace. And that, more than anything else, was my greatest victory. After sacrificing her youth serving the nation, Quinn Maddox returned home expecting peace, only to face the most devastating betrayal from her own family. In this gripping episode of Revenge Stories, discover how a decorated soldier became the target of a ruthless family drama, where lies, greed, and manipulation reached unimaginable depths. When her own parents and brother plotted to steal everything she worked for, including $160,000 of her hard-earned savings, Quinn stayed silent, but what she did next turned the entire courtroom upside down. With just one piece of evidence, she exposed a criminal conspiracy that shocked everyone. If you think you've heard betrayal before, think again. This is more than just family drama. It's one of those revenge stories where truth cuts deeper than revenge itself.